winter pruning is essential. That summer pruning would basically be a complete waste of time if we don't do this follow-up winter pruning right now.
All right, Daniel, we are revisiting the scene of the crime. This last summer, you gave my beloved peach tree, which at the time was quite productive, a very extreme haircut. But you had told me at that time, if we were gonna make that summer haircut good, we would have to revisit it in the winter. What are we gonna do today that is going to maximize fruit production and the actual longevity of the tree? Because I wanna still be picking trees off this bad boy when I'm 80.
Yeah, so I saw in your trees a lot of the things that are really popular for like homeowner fruit tree care that you see online. And as a professional arborist, I spent a lot of time correcting the issues caused by that type of pruning. And I think we can get a lot more out of our trees if we don't solely focus on fruit production, but take into account other aspects of tree health. So now that it is winter and we've been able to assess how the trees did in the summer, this is when we can really make some significant changes that will improve the tree's fruit production and also longevity.
Cool, let's do it.
All right, so with this tree, it responded to those cuts we made by sending up a ton of really vertical rapid growth. If you look straight up, these branches that are growing vertical, this is 1 year's growth. That's almost 5 to 6 feet of growth in 1 year, which is honestly crazy for a peach tree. You told me that it was a fast growing tree, but I'm honestly amazed.
I planted this tree the exact same day that I planted this tree. Although I did bury a chicken underneath that tree, so maybe that had something to do with it, but probably not.
All right, so new growth in trees is determined a lot by a plant hormone called auxin. And one thing auxin does is it orients new growth towards the available light. And so that's why when we pruned this tree heavy, all of the new growth was basically straight up.
And that's probably because, like, if we're gonna boil this down a lot, the leaves of trees are solar panels. Ultimately, what the tree actually wants is like the most solar panels with the most access to sun. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that auxin orients new growth towards the sun, and it also does something called apical dominance, where it makes it so all the lateral buds, so these buds growing on the side, don't grow, whereas the bud on the very tip continues to grow straight towards the sun. And so by reducing these really tall branches, we're doing a couple things. Is we are disrupting that flow of auxin, which will hopefully help change that apical dominance, and we're also opening up more light up here in the interior canopy.
Is that so that like these little branches can then get enough sunlight so that they can actually sustain the growth of some new peaches?
Yeah, there's that, and also, you know, because there's been so much shade, a lot of branches like this branch here,
oh yeah,
have actually been shaded out, and you can tell this branch is dead because it's not this like healthy maroon color, it's brown and withered. And so when there's no sun, branches kind of just die back and the tree self prunes. And so by opening it up, disrupting that kind of flow of auxin, hopefully these little branches will get more energy. But honestly, for not this next summer, but the next summer, hopefully we're getting some growth on these branches here so that there can be some fruit lower down and easier to reach.
So basically what you're saying is like if we give this more sunlight, it's gonna fill out and grow like more branches in this area, which is ideal.
Yeah, and that's the goal. You know, the trees are living things. How they exactly respond is unpredictable, but if we don't address this now, there's no chance that that's gonna happen. And it's also probably gonna require some follow-up pruning in about August or September, some summer pruning that will help, again, keep the tree maintained, but also help this whole cycle continue. This tree honestly is amazing with how it's grown and responded and been productive, but it's a pretty high maintenance tree because of just how vigorous it is. So we're gonna need to prune this at least once a year, probably twice a year.
I would also say that all of what you just said is a huge argument for learning how to prune ourselves, which is exactly what we're doing here, because we know that we're going to have to revisit this often. And little and often is a whole lot better than one straight thing every few years by an actual professional. So why don't you actually just go about pruning this tree and tell us, you know, like what kinds of cuts you're making and how, and I'll get out of your way and stop chatting your ear off and making my dumb jokes. Go after it, man.
Let's do it. So we have 3 types of cuts we can do on a tree. The first is a thinning cut, where we take a smaller diameter branch back to a larger diameter branch. And so that looks like a little bit where I'm removing some of these unhealthy suckers or reducing some of these branches. So this branch that died here, for example, I am taking it back to the main branch. And if you look, when you're doing a thinning cut, if it's a healthy attachment, there will be what is called the branch bark ridge, which you can see better right here. It's this kind of uplifted area of bark. And that's a sign that the wood is actually like interwoven and a strong, good attachment. Ideally, you don't want to prune past that bark branch ridge because that will open up the tree to more decay. So we want to prune just outside of that.
Just a little nubbin.
Just a little nubbin, exactly. So the second type of cut is called a reduction cut, and that is where we take a larger diameter branch back to a healthy lateral that's at least a third of the diameter of the branch we're pruning. So it looks something like this, where you have this branch that's growing straight down. That's not great. So we're gonna take it back to this lateral branch, which again is a branch growing off the main branch that's a third of the diameter or larger, and we'll take it there. So the third type of cut is called a heading cut, and that is where you cut a branch back to where there is not a healthy lateral. So for this one, we'll be pruning it back to these buds here. So for example, this would be a heading cut. Heading cuts typically result in what's called epicormic growth, which is just like this rapid, fast vertical growth that we've seen on this tree. If we're gonna make heading cuts, it's really important that we pay attention to where that bud we pruned back to is placed. We want it to be growing directly out and away from the tree because that is the direction the new growth is going to occur. So this bud, you can tell it has these two on the side and this one in the middle. So these are gonna be flowers. This here right in the middle is gonna be a new leaf, and that is probably gonna grow up and out like that. And so we wanna pay attention. If we were to take it back to like this one right here, it would grow like towards me and up. And so that really affects the structure of the tree long term, is just the direction that these buds are actually facing. So we don't want to prune from a bud that's going inside or back to side. We want to prune it so it's, again, growing away from the center of the tree. So when I'm pruning any tree, I want to start with my biggest cuts and then work my way down to the finer cuts. And that way as I go, I can make kind of refined decisions. So this is a chance that we can take some really heavy cuts that we didn't take in the summer.
Great.
All right, so I want the branches that we have to be within relatively easy reach. And so for this, that's gonna include removing some pretty
holy moly,
good sized branches.
This is literally my whole fruit tree, but okay, we're good. It's fine, it's fine.
Yeah. All right, so again, I'm gonna keep continuing with these larger cuts. All right, there you are. And so I'm doing a couple things. Is I am considering the structure of this tree. I am pruning branches that are growing directly away from like the approximate center of this tree. So we have like a nice spreading open canopy. And also that's gonna long-term let more light penetrate like the inside, because the pruning we do now is gonna directly affect the fruit production of this coming season, but also it's gonna affect the growth that's gonna be the fruit production for the season after that. So in our last video, we talked a lot about establishing a central leader, especially on that apple tree. And all trees will have that strong central leader when they're young, but different types of trees will branch out at different stages. And so some trees will just be naturally more widespread, whereas others will naturally be more contained. But one thing nice about having a central leader is it allows those branches to be dispersed along that trunk at different spaces. Whereas this tree right here, its structure is established in this vase shape. So as far as fruit production goes, or the traditional fruit production mentality, this is a really good shape. But if you look, all of its main branches originate at the exact same spot. And the good news is these are healthy branch attachments. You can tell because the bark has this ridge that run along the attachments, and that's called the branch bark ridge. And that indicates that the wood fibers are like interwoven and there is really good, strong support there. However, if one of these branches fails, that is going to compromise all of the other branches.
And I'll just pop in here. Is that like because if this splits, then we're literally splitting the trunk in half?
Right, yeah, it splits the trunk in half. And also like once that split happens, then the wood decay fungi can get in there, and then all these other attachments are then compromised. And I've seen this firsthand. My dad grew up on fruit orchards, and growing up, we had a few prize peach trees. And right when they were like in max fruit production years, they had a serious breakage because they had so much big, delicious fruit on them, but it resulted in these wounds. And within 5 years later, the tree is completely compromised and basically has to be removed. And we want to avoid that.
Everything that you're saying makes sense, but I'm just gonna like dumb it down for myself and for others too. Leverage is a big thing for me. I played on a teeter-totter a lot as a kid, and basically the farther out you get, the more the weight of fruit is going to affect the structural integrity of the tree. So if we've got 80 peaches out on this branch, that's going to put so much pressure here in that situation, midsummer, loaded down with fruit. A windstorm can literally just totally tear this thing apart because of all of that leverage that's way out here on the branches.
Yeah, exactly. And for this tree, the fruit production is happening on wood that grew last summer.
Yeah.
And if we consider this summer, but then the next summer, that's just gonna keep things going further and further and further out. And the way this tree is growing, you know, that's gonna put a ton of leverage and pressure right on all of these unions. And again, they are healthy, but wood can only handle so much pressure and strain.
If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, what I would imagine is that we're gonna cut that branch there.
Exactly.
Because it grew straight up, and now that's like way far away. So if we put weight all the way out on that end of the teeter-totter, we're gonna be really, really messed up. But if we keep it down here, closer to this, like this central weight-bearing area, we're gonna be golden. I would imagine too that like we want to like not fully remove all these little internal branches, but that we probably also want to think about, okay, what will actually be able to sustain the weight of a peach?
Exactly. Right now, yeah, thinking about the future, we're reducing these really long limbs, and because the structure is already set, you can tell that.
Don't mind the interruption from my tick-eating factory over there. They're guinea keats that are apparently threatened by a gust of wind or cloud or a shadow over their coop, and here we are. Speaking of windy weather, that brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Anchor Solix. We live in the South where tornadoes are a regular thing. In fact, last week a tornado ripped right through our neighborhood and our power was out for 4 days. And as a farmer, an entire year's worth of effort, time, and money goes into the things that are stored in my freezer, and keeping that freezer cold is hugely important to me. So I had asked Adam a few months back to do research on battery backups for our home, and he found the Anchor Solix. And this little guy offers the same amount of power output as 40 of these. This thing can power your home appliances, like your freezers, for 8 to 18 hours, depending on how much of a cycle draw they have. It's got regular little electrical plugs. It's also got all the little doodad and device plugs for your digital devices or phones or whatever. But wait, there's more. You can also get this bad boy, which is an expansion pack, which will double your usage time for all of your devices. But wait, there's still more. Because our power was out for 4 days during the tornado, we had to recharge this thing using these solar panels, which will recharge each one of these units in under 2 hours. These things are super sweet. Click the link in the description to find out more about these things, and a huge thank you again to Anchor Solix for sponsoring this video and for making videos like this possible. Back to the pruning.
So yeah, I'm gonna be reducing a lot of these longer branches, trying to keep it just inside that branch bark ridge and branch collar. And it seems like I always manage to hit Adam right in the face when I'm doing this.
As I'm just holding this umbrella over Adam from the rain here, another big question that folks had in our last video is like, why are we not propagating all of these branches? And I will personally interject and say the reason that we weren't propagating all those branches is this is a dwarf tree variety, which means that it was a peach tree that was grafted onto a short rootstock. If we were to take branches from the top part of this tree that were grafted onto the rootstock of the tree and just stick those in the ground with some rooting hormone or anything else, we would basically be planting a tree that ultimately was naturally inclined to be about 80 feet tall. And there's no safe way to, without specialized equipment, to be able to actually pick fruit from that high. Wow, this rain is really raining on my parade.
It's coming down.
I was led to believe we had a light sprinkle coming at 3 p.m. and this doesn't really feel like a light sprinkle, but here we are and it's time to prune the tree and we're gonna do it because we're super thankful that Daniel's here doing it.
Rain or shine.
Rain or shine. Here we are, farming at its best, my friends. Yeah.
Wow.
Oops. Oh, sorry, my steak is still there, but we don't need to talk about that.
Is this a steak from the last video?
Yeah, it is. But I mean, here's the thing. I was waiting for winter time for the ground to soften up, which it in fact has. However, I'm not going to humiliate myself on camera right now trying to get it out. I'll come back with my tractor and it'll be great.
And you will rip the whole tree out of the ground.
Ironically, this little stake and ratchet strap was the very reason that we started looking at this peach tree in the first place, because Daniel was like, if you have anything around the bark of the tree, like this little label up here, it's going to do what's called girdling the tree, a word I learned in our last video. A ratchet strap here will basically cut off the ability of the bark to send the nutrients up to the top of the tree where the fruit is actually going to grow. So we don't want to do those kinds of things. We're going to basically rebalance the tree naturally instead of trying to force it mechanically.
Excellent. So, Anne, we have gotten all of the big major branches removed. This thing is about half as tall as it was before. And so right now what I'm doing is I am reducing a lot of this long growth, like you were saying, so that like a lot of these branches where the peaches are actually going to occur can support some peaches without bending straight down like, you know, some of these guys have already done. And honestly, having branches that are growing at kind of more an upward angle means that they're going to be able to support more weight. If that branch is growing at a downward angle, as that weight increases, it'll
just snap.
It's way more likely to snap.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just going to go around. I'm going to be doing a series of heading cuts and reduction cuts to kind of take care of a lot of these issues. Also looking at branches that are growing the wrong direction.
In the last video, like kind of the main point of the last video was that lion tailing was one of the biggest mistakes that like beginner pruners make. Can you kind of address that?
Yeah, totally. So there's a lot of emphasis on like home DIY pruning, on thinning the tree and letting air circulate around the tree. And what that results in people doing is intentionally removing all the branches that start from like the base of the branch all the way to the tip, so that there's just a leaf and like fruit at the tips of the branches. And like we talked about before, that creates a huge lever arm effect. As wind hits that, there's no sort of buffer effect. When there's evenly dispersed branches down the branch, that lets all of those move kind of at different rates, which dampens the effect of wind so that they can be stronger and support more. And so right now,
wait, hold on. I'm just going to quickly interject because this is actually something that I suddenly understand for the very first time. Okay, when the wind blows, leaves are absorbing some of that wind power, right?
Yeah.
And so what you were just saying is like if all of our leaves are basically on like little pom-poms at the top of the tree, then that's going to become like a wind sail that's going to spread the tree apart and like break these branches. But when we first started pruning these trees together, I wanted to literally come and clip all of these tiny little branches away because I was like, this is never going to be able to support a fruit. But if we now have pruned out all this stuff that's going to shade this out, now this is going to get enough solar energy for those leaves, those solar panels, to send some like thickness growth out. And then all the leaves that are going to come from this are going to then actually become kind of like tiny wind sails of their own. So that will like disperse the wind's energy throughout the whole tree, which basically makes me think about like that Dr. Seuss movie, The Lorax, which if we're in Tornado Alley with a bunch of Lorax trees, we're not going to have any fruits next year.
Exactly. This is especially common in the like Pacific Northwest where there's like wind sail reduction, and it's basically professional tree workers selling lion tailing, and it's totally counterproductive because they go and remove all the interior branches with the idea that, oh, the wind's just gonna sail through there a lot easier. But what that actually does is, like you said, it creates these pom-poms and all the wind is just hitting the end of it, which really puts a ton of strain right at those crotches. And if you actually have evenly dispersed branches, those move at different rates depending on how big they are, how long they are. So it kind of disrupts that overall wind force so that there's not as much pressure on those crotches, so they're less likely to break.
So, but really, if fruit production and longevity is the goal, no matter where we are, we really want to focus on making sure that our tree is actually balanced.
Exactly, yeah. And paying attention to things like branch spacing, as well as the direction the branches are growing. That's something I've seen on a lot of YouTube videos, is they'll understand some of these concepts, but then they'll prune back to a branch that's growing like in some crazy direction. So, you know, there are some things, multiple things to keep in mind as you're going. But when it comes down to it, what I'm really passionate about is understanding like what is actually happening in the tree and not treating the trees like some sort of formula, like understanding the principles so that you can apply that to different trees rather than just being like, oh, I'm gonna do this X, Y, and Z, because they're living things. Each tree is gonna be slightly different. Even trees of the exact same species in different locations or depending how they're planted are gonna respond differently. So if you're able to like read the tree and like, oh, this tree's struggling, I'm not gonna prune as much, or like this tree has this specific growth form, I'm gonna use that to my advantage rather than like fighting against it.
Okay, I'm popping back in here to say that I think that there's actually a really good life principle at play here. And that is, rules were kind of made to be broken. However, to actually be able to break a rule in a way that's not ultimately or long-term very destructive, we really have to understand the rule and the reason for it so that we can actually break it. And there's a lot more we could say about that from a life lesson standpoint, but this is a tree pruning video, so let's get back to it. You want the bigger pruners, bro?
Oh, I just needed a hand workout today. And why use the right tool when you can just, you know, get really good grip strength?
Daniel, you just lost your safety glasses, which I think this is a good opportunity to talk about everyone's least favorite topic, safety.
Right.
Tell us what you're doing and why.
As a professional arborist, I have climbed 100-foot trees with chainsaws. I've never cut myself with a chainsaw. I've been super careful. The injuries I've received have been from using tools like handsaws or from just little branches like this poking me directly in the eye.
I mean, I feel like we could probably remove those so that we can see your eyes for a second, but we'll talk about why we're wearing them in the first place.
So that honestly is something I have actually fought with my manager about being a professional arborist, is like, you have to have eye protection to be safe, but also you kind of have to see what you're doing to be safe. So if I'm getting really foggy glasses, that's why I lost them in the first place. I took them off and they fell off. But eye injuries are super serious. And if you cause permanent damage, that is something you have to live with the rest of your life. So it's worth just wearing some safety glasses. And also, I've cut myself with saws like this.
Good night in heaven.
I have gloves, it's fine.
We understand the rules so we can break them, Daniel.
It's fine, I got gloves, it's fine. These saws are insanely sharp, especially when they're new. You can easily cause some serious damage to your hands. So just put on some gloves. It's really simple, but realize like there is some inherent risk in what you're doing and be careful.
And I'll also say that safety is super important. I nearly lost my eyesight in this eye when I bent over a blueberry bush and depth perception and all those things kind of got in my way, and I literally poked it, ended up in the hospital. Serious things over really silly mistakes that could totally be avoided. Okay, Daniel, it looks like you've given my tree the same bowl cut my mom used to give me, but tell us where we're going from here. All
right, so again, you might look at what we talked about where all of the fruit is produced on the wood that grew last year, and you're like, we removed so much wood that grew last year. However, thinning trees, both the fruit and the branches that produce fruit, means that the fruit that is on there is going to grow bigger and be healthier. So this tree should still be really productive.
Are you saying we're gonna get bigger, better peaches now?
Bigger, better peaches. And I don't know if you can tell on camera, but this tree is now hobbit size, about 5 feet tall.
And sized, if you will.
But yeah, so we've reduced these long, heavy branches, made it so that when it does produce fruit, it's not gonna weigh so heavy. We've set ourselves up for this next year to have success, but also the following year, the growth that forms is going to be able to support fruit. But again, this is going to be a high maintenance tree. We're going to have to do consistent pruning to keep up with it so that it keeps on being healthy and productive and doesn't just split apart.
Awesome. Okay, let's take a look at a different tree.
All right.
In our last video, we also addressed this plum tree, and at that time we did some similarly heavy pruning, and you had some thoughts about what was going to happen. Let's talk about that.
Right. So honestly, Ann, we should not prune this tree this year. Most of its issues are from improper planting. If we look down here, we can tell that it was just planted way too deep. We have to go about 4 to 6 inches before we hit a lateral root. And so this tree, no matter how we prune it, is gonna be unhealthy.
And actually, we're gonna be able to fix those issues, but that's another video for another time. as it happens, this is actually the perfect time of year to plant fruit trees. You're gonna show us how to do that the right way. Let's go plant some trees.
Let's do it.
All right, we will see you in that video. Cheers!